This week on Ask an Expert, water. Welcome to Ask an Expert, the show where you submit questions to be answered by people around the school. I'm your host, Keiran Lanois. This week on Ask an Expert, our question is water wet? Here to answer the question is members of Carlton's debate club, Shamir and Keiran. Welcome to Ask an Expert. Here we are debating, is water wet? Here to agree that it is wet is Shamir, and to debate that it isn't is Keiran. Shamir, what's your first point?
Well, whether water is wet, to answer that question, we gotta think about the definition of wet. So to get a conclusive answer, we must make sure that we have a fair definition of the word wet. And according to Merriam-Webster, the word wet can be defined as consisting of, containing, or covered with water. And by that definition, water is wet because it consists of water, it contains water, and on a molecular basis, it is covered with water. Water molecules, and I'm going to zoom into a little bit so you can understand it better. Water is a polar molecule. It has a partial charge on its hydrogen atoms and on a partial negative charge in its oxygen atoms. So water molecules basically stick to each other. And that is why they cover each other. I guess you could say water is wetter than other substances. So water is wet.
Keiran, do you have your point?
Yes, I do. The main basis that this argument or debate is mainly going to focus around is the definition of what is wet. The Oxford Canadian Dictionary defines wet as being covered or immersed in a liquid, normally water, and we're going to stick with that for this debate.
Yeah.
Now, you can't be immersed in something if you are made of that thing. It would be weird for me to say that I am wet with blood, even though I am made with blood.
Well, I mean, that would make
Because
sense if you did have blood all over you.
Yeah, but I'm saying within my veins, within
Yeah.
my arteries. It's not on me, it is in me, which is what you are saying, that water is wet because it's attracted to itself.
Yeah. Water molecules basically. Well, water is immersed in water. That's why I said look at it from a molecular perspective. Water molecules are constantly immersed in other water molecules in a solution of water.
But I would argue that you can't have something immersed in itself. That just breaks some basic English rules.
Well, I mean, you could definitely have something that's immersed in itself. Why wouldn't that make sense?
Well, you could have, for example, the green screen behind me, the paint on that screen, the layers of paint are immersed in itself. Would I then say that the paint is immersed in paint?
Well, but you see, you're taking this into a more abstract way. You're taking this into you're basically using wordplay. If you look at it from a logical perspective, which is what I'm doing using facts and science, water is wet. And if you look at, say, the definition provided by the Oxford Dictionary, I would say the definition is wrong. I would say the one I brought up is a lot more fair and scientific and logical.
Well, I would say that, so you use the Merriam-Webster dictionary,
Yes.
correct? Merriam-Webster was an American that created the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Yeah.
Henceforth, the Merriam-Webster dictionary is an American dictionary.
Yeah.
Whereas the Oxford Canadian Dictionary is the Canadian dictionary. Where you would then, if you're going by that definition, be going by a foreign definition rather than the definition provided in the Oxford Canadian Dictionary, which is of our country, of the language spoken within Canada.
But that doesn't change anything. When one definition is better than the other, better suited for especially this argument when the definition is suited better. Why do we care what country came up with it?
Well, we don't say a mechanical box that brings people to different floors. We don't call that a lift. We call that an elevator. That's differences in different countries and different regions with language. I'm using that same argument here, that in the United States, yes, water may be wet by your argument, but here in Canada, based off of the definition of the Oxford Canadian Dictionary, it would not be.
Again, you're bringing language into this, but let's go with your definition.
How is this not a language argument?
Covered with or immersed in. So you see, if you focus on the word "or," water is covered with water, as I brought up in my first point. It may, and let's say you're right, it isn't immersed in water. It is still covered with water. So even by your definition, water is wet.
Well, going back to the paint in the green screen behind us, I wouldn't typically say that the paint is covered in paint. That just doesn't make sense.
Well, if the paint molecules are sticking to each other, aren't they covered with paint?
Well, no, they're two separate entities of the same thing. They're just close to each other. If I had, for example, if I were a biologist and I had a petri dish with two cells in it, I wouldn't say the cells were covered with cells. No, I'd say there'd be two cells in that petri dish.
But cells can cover cells.
But not in this application that we're having here. That you're saying just because they're beside each other, that makes it that they're covered with each other.
Well, water molecules stick to each other, all right? So I would say water is covering water. This is going to go on forever.
All right, I think we're at a stalemate here.
Yes.
Let's look at it from a more abstract perspective, all right? So if we associate wetness with a sensation, dipping your hand in water, you would feel that water is wet.
Yes, but then your hand is covered, is immersed around with water. But that doesn't, by either definition, that would be considered true, that your hand, if you're to just dunk it in a bucket of water, would be wet. I don't see how that argument applies.
Oh, your hand would be wet.
Yeah.
But we already discussed how, from a molecular basis, water is wet. But now we're discussing whether, when we, from a more abstract perspective, so people can understand, if we dip our hand in water, I'm not talking about our hand getting wet. I'm talking about the wetness, the feeling that is provided by the water. So if you associate it with the sensation, we already decided that from the definition, just like from pure facts and science, water is wet. But from a more abstract perspective, where we associate it with like a sensation where it's just a matter of perspective, water is still wet.
We never settled on the fact that at a molecular basis that water was wet. However, I'm going to gloss over that for the sake of time, that by both our definitions, it isn't based off of the sensation, it is off the physical fact of water being on top or near something, i.e. our hand in this case.
Well, it seems like we're at a little bit of a stalemate here. This question may be going on forever, and we may never know the answer, but thank you for giving two perspectives on this very interesting debate. That's it for this week's Ask an Expert, but we're always looking for new questions. Tweet them at @PACarlton with the hashtag AskAnExpert, and we'll find someone who can answer it for you. See you next week.